I do not care what the scenario is, but do not assume you know what direction that deer is coming from a trail camera picture.
This episode of the Whitetail Podcast brought to you by Moultrie. We're talking about November with Thomas Mlsna.
It almost sounds cliche to say it because everyone says it this time of year. And if they're not saying it, they should. Don't stop scouting. Everything's changing in the whitetail woods all the time. And like you said, this time of year, everything's escalated so fast. It just
There's a
rapidly
multiple
changing.
on everything. It feels
100%.
If you've struggled with November, this episode is going to give you a refocus on how to make the most out of the rut. Right now, we're talking trail camera tactics, boots on the ground scouting, and just mental grit, as cheesy as that is. Hope this helps you fill your buck tag this November. Here we go.
If you're at this point right now, feeling somewhat discouraged or don't really know what to do with the next couple weeks here in November, but you're feeling this pressure, get out there and suffer. And once you suffer enough, you will have success.
All right, Thomas, we just finished up a Whitetail Cribs episode. Appreciate you having us. You have a really cool setup. It was cool. We've done a lot of podcasts over the years, and so it was fun to see like the studio setup behind you and actually see some of these giant deer in person. So first off, thanks for having us here, and I encourage everyone to watch the Whitetail Cribs episode later because he had some really cool stories and just an awesome setup.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you guys coming up here, making the trip up to southwestern Wisconsin, share those stories, those memories, especially this time of the year, right? Like, we're in it.
We are.
We're in the season, and, honestly, a lot of my success can be owed to previous success. Like, you think about different scenarios that you've experienced, whether it's the same area of the farm that you're hunting. How are deer moving? What did that buck do, 5-6 years ago under the same situation or same circumstances, or completely different area, just like, well, based on what I've learned with how deer react to pressure, how deer react to wind, what food sources are the most attractive during certain times of the year. So, like we talked about in the Cribs episode, every one of those animals on the wall is a very vivid memory for me, right? And I can play out the shot sequence on every one of those. It's burned into my brain.
Yep.
So many different aspects of the hunt, but it gets burned into your memory, and I just love to relive it. So I appreciate you guys coming up as well. And now I'm excited to sit down and have a conversation about hunting deer.
Absolutely. It is funny how that works, and it's fun how the more you hunt, the more your mental catalog of situations and scenarios, build up. And so we're going to tap into your mental catalog here for November. Like, now is the time where everyone is hitting the woods. Maybe someone was tiptoeing throughout October and they didn't quite get it done, and now it's like, okay, it is time to get serious. There is a period of time here where it's still likely going to get better activity, and then it's going to start getting worse in all reality, based off of whatever data or personal experience you want to share with. So let's just kick this off with a little pep talk, because I feel if you're listening to this right now, you're like, I need to figure some things out. October didn't go quite how I wanted, and man, I'm starting to feel a little bit of internal pressure, and I think that's anyone that tries hard at anything, it's natural to feel that.
Yeah, my cousin and I have this little inside joke or saying that we pass back and forth all the time about the level of suffering that comes with hunting in general, whether you're out west or in the Midwest. And basically what it'll come down to is he'd be like, I haven't really been seeing much. And like, well, maybe you just haven't suffered enough, right? So it goes hand in hand. We've talked about this plenty of times before. Everything is a time investment. And, sometimes you are suffering, whatever level that might be. Suffering because there's a lot of other things you should be doing, or suffering because you've just been grinding hard. You're enduring the conditions, the weather, all of the work that goes in, the repetitiveness of it. At this point in the season, if you're like me, and I generally start hunting very early in the season. In fact, I have a love-hate relationship with this time of year, the rut, because things become less predictable. And I say that they are still predictable, but I think the difference is from August or even, July, when we reset trail cameras and we're looking at velvet footage all the way up into September, early October, those deer are kind of doing the same thing for the most part, food to bed, food to bed. Oh, they're in this area for a while, they're in that area for a while, whatever it might be. But I think you're looking at that and the anticipation's building and you're putting together these plans, at least for me anyways. I'm looking at historical data from the last few years of any buck that I have, and I'm going, okay, where was he last year around this time? Where's he going to be this year around this time? And I'm anticipating that. And then all of a sudden November hits, or even, the last week of October, and everything gets turned on its head. There's still a lot of predictability there. But I think, we're reaching the climax of the season, right? So everything's escalating so fast. And for me as a bow hunter, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this feel the same way, it's like, there's only like a couple weeks of season left. For me, my season it's never really over.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I know that once the rifle season hits here in Wisconsin, which
changes.
Yeah, it's the weekend before Thanksgiving is rifle opener, the Orange Army, right? And it is that. I mean, you drive around the countryside in Wisconsin during that weekend and there's orange all over the place. And you just know that, one, your target buck or any potential target that you have is likely to get shot at or shot. Whichever one is worse, I don't know. You can argue like injured, not recovered, shot, recovered, or just pressured. I think that's the biggest thing. Like there's so much pressure. Everything's turned upside down. Natural deer movement has completely changed. So any of these things that you've been picking up on, these little, tendencies that bucks have, all that stuff's out the window almost overnight. So I really start to feel that pressure this time of year. It's crunch time. It is make somewhat aggressive moves knowing that you're on the clock. You're running out of time. If you envision that hourglass, like we're getting down the last few grains of sand in there, but it is still predictable. So the pep talk, to circle back on that, is, if you're at this point in the season, and be honest with yourself, right? I have these conversations with myself all the time. It's, am I not having the success that I want? And for me, at this point in the season, obviously, the top end of that success is being tagged out. But if I'm still having encounters with a buck that I want to pursue, and or he's still on the property in general, I look at those as a success, right? Because, a lot of people by this point in the season, and it's not always your fault, but that's why I say be honest with yourself, because you may or may not have overpressured your property and altered that deer movement already, pushed him off.
I think that's a pretty common trend.
Very common, yeah. I just had this conversation the other day with a client, kind of a pep talk in general, like, hey, this spot is a really good spot. We know this is a really good spot. We know it's a really good spot the first week in November. That does not mean it's a really good spot mid-October. So you need to be patient and stay out of there. Now, if that cell camera that you have back there is blowing up the last week in October, then yeah, make that move, right? But ultimately, we want to save that spot, and the reason for that is we're really pushing into the property, the depths of that property. It's a lot more intrusive. I always tell them, scout from the outside in, hunt from the outside in. Like, don't go any deeper than you have to. The last few years, obviously with cell cams, have really changed that game because we can stay out of those areas and get intel fed to us. But, we've talked about this before, and I just want to reiterate. Cameras only tell you a certain percentage of what's happening on a property. So do not rely on cameras entirely to make your move. Always anticipate that. And, I've got those trail camera rules that I give to all my clients. My number one rule of trail cameras is they only tell you where you should have been, not where you should be. So that's where I always go back to that historical data. Really lean on that historical data. And if you're at this point right now and you're feeling somewhat discouraged or don't really know what to do with the next couple weeks here in November, but you're feeling this pressure, be honest with yourself. First and foremost, have you suffered enough? Right? Have you put in the time?
Yeah.
In one big advantage that we have as whitetail hunters is, we can go home after a hunt and lick our wounds and debrief and regroup. And there's a lot of things that we can do from home. We're sitting in my headquarters, if you want to call it that, right? Yeah, right. They're in the man cave right now. On the other side of that wall is my office/studio. This is more of like my hobby area, right? I work over there, I play over here. And, that's where I recharge my batteries on the cameras. I run a combination of lithiums and rechargeables and externals and all the things and cards. I dump the cards there. But when I sit down here and I stare at that topography map, I'm in the zone. And then that Rain Man shit starts happening, right? And I'm like, I honest to God, like I can't even tell you how many hours I've laid in bed and visualized topo lines in my brain. And you'll stare at the ceiling fan and eventually it just kind of fades away in the darkness and I see these curved lines and I'm envisioning movement and how that air flows and where I think deer are coming from and how I can get in and how I can get out and where, all the things that come into play. But we can do that. Come back home, go through those pictures. And one of the things that I've done time and time again is look at historical data, not of a specific deer, but where are you seeing that rut activity, specifically that first week in November, because it's very, very consistent. Certain areas of the farm, if you have a smaller property, maybe it is just your property. Like when is your property the most active in general? But you can decipher that without having to be on the property, putting pressure on your woods. Go back, scroll through all those trail camera pictures. What is that 3 to 5 day window that is presenting mature buck activity during the daylight? And that's when I want to try and focus on and zoom in. And at this point, you're probably already past when you should have scheduled your rutcation, maybe, right?
Got some sick days maybe left.
yeah, and take advantage of that, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing, in correlation with that, and we've talked about this too, is my go-to tactic of kind of committing at least 2 to 3 days to a hunt. So I don't like to just go back, and I say go back because I hunt property that's about an hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes from where I live here. And I don't like to just go back there and be like, okay, I'm going to go jump in this tree and see what I see. I want to be calculated at some level. If I do have, say I blocked off a full week to hunt, I'm going to be looking at trail camera pictures. I'm doing as much as I can to put myself in position before I even step foot on that farm. So I'm narrowing down areas of the farm that I want to focus my interest on. And then I'm looking at that most recent information and how that feeds into these theories I've created on movement and also where these animals are going to be. We just talked about one of these stories with the whitetail cribs, but we just talked about how I shift from my plan B buck, or my plan A buck, to my plan B buck. I always wait. I'm focused 100% on my plan A buck, and I will give them until October 31st. I will continue to hunt plan A if I think he's huntable, but at that point, if he's not consistent on the property, or maybe I haven't seen him in a few weeks, maybe he got killed, maybe he's locked down somewhere else, at this point, this first week in November, I am now shifting to plan B, whatever that might be. Maybe I don't even have a plan B. Maybe I need to find a plan B. That's where, again, I go back and look at that historical data. But one of the things that I learned, from this buck here specifically, we talked about, is specifically this time of year. When we're watching these bucks bounce in and out of lockdown, right? So it's pretty common, or at least what I see is, these bucks go out, they seek, they find, they shadow a doe, especially mature bucks. Like, and this one was a good example. I watched this deer shadow a doe for a couple of days before he actually really, really locked down and bred her. But he spent multiple days with her. And during that course of time, a lot can happen, but they don't generally go very far if they're not getting bumped. Both the does and the bucks are trying to find secluded areas. The does are trying to hide from other bucks, especially those little bucks that are really pestering. And the bigger bucks, the mature bucks, are trying to push these does into areas where they can contain them. And the result of that is just a lack of movement. So to kind of summarize the story of this buck, I was pursuing him in this area. Initially I was like, well, looking at the topo map, playing out these scenarios, I'm like, I can go here, I can go here. This spot's a little bit more intrusive, a little bit closer to bedding. This spot's more of a travel corridor, pinch point. But my gut tells me this is a better spot. And what led me there that particular year it was a relatively warm, dry start to November, and there was a water hole there. So, and this is how my brain plays it out. A lot of times I'm just mentally going pros and cons of this location or that timing, right? So if all of a sudden I have all these checks in the pro column of you should go here or pursue this deer or make that move, versus the against column, the water hole is just in favor of that location. Anyways, I went there and had a really good encounter with him. Should have gotten it done that morning, but having that camera arm in the tree blocked my 15-yard shot, which actually, everything happens for a reason, and it worked out because I had an awesome experience pursuing that deer. 3 of 4 consecutive days, I watched him from dawn until dark, and of those days, he never left the 200-yard bubble. Food to bed, food to bed, food to bed. So if I would have hunted this other location, which was only a couple hundred yards from there, same field, pinch point, but different corner, blind corner, I would have never seen that deer. Never seen him. I would have hunted there for a day, maybe a couple days, and went, man, this farm sucks this year. But 150, 200 yards away, I was in this pinch point between bedding areas that just had an insane amount of activity, including watching my target buck.
What do you think was the reason that area had so much more activity?
I think it's a combination of things. Again, it's all speculation at some level, but
yeah.
I talk about those 4 key elements all the time. To me, those are the most critical elements in what dictate when, where, and how bucks move. So it's just easier to kind of quantify that. So first and foremost, I think the wind direction had a lot to do with it. The wind was very consistent for that 4-day period. It was, again, a warmer stretch, so it was a southern wind. We get mostly westerly prevailing wind, so it was like a southern, south to southwest wind, which made that bedding area more ideal. Now, also the timing element, given that time of the year, November, we're already a month and a half into season in Wisconsin, and the pressure is up quite a bit. The leaves are off. That increases pressure because deer can see more, they can hear more, they can smell more, everything. So that particular spot was more secluded, harder to access. The wind gave those deer the advantage, so they wanted to be there anyway. And then on top of that, the pressure, good food source right there. There was still a really good alfalfa field. In combination with the alfalfa there, we do cover crops in all of our corn. So, my food plots are phenomenal, but they're really just like this magnet that pulls deer through an area and kind of keeps them moving through that area, but they're not the staple. They're not the foundation. It's really, really hard to compete with luscious alfalfa and hundreds of acres of cereal rye. That was, that's 6 inches tall. It's like prime, right?
Yeah.
But that was a good food source holding them there. So on top of that, you have oaks and, woody browse and all the good stuff with habitat in that area. But I think that's the big reason, is the timing of it, the pressure on the property. That other spot was a little bit closer, and you've been on our farm. That other spot would have been a little bit closer to this access road that goes down the valley where our hunting cabin is. So there's not a ton of pressure there, but there's pressure. The occasional ATV or truck traffic driving up and down there. And we start dealing with 5 or 6 year old deer in an area with a lot of pressure. It's just one of those things like, well, if I'm going to move through this area, I'd just rather avoid it. And I'll go over here. Pressure is a very relative thing, so they just kind of tend to avoid it. But all those things come into play. And, again, a lot of it's just the anticipation and finding those spots, but also understanding if you're in a spot and you're not seeing activity, those deer could just be over the hill. They could be on the next property. And looking at things in kind of a window. I tend to, this time of year, think of things in a cycle. And there's probably some more exact science and numbers behind it, but it seems like a lot of times it's like a 4 to 5 day cycle with these bucks. So my general strategy right now, it's the same throughout the whole season, but I'll go back to the farm and I usually try to, again, block at least a few days. Usually within 36 hours or 3 sits or so, I can locate my target buck. And that's a combination of visual observation from a tree stand. It might be a spot where I think there's a decent chance it's worth moving in and hunting, or it's purely an observation type sit. And every observation sit has the potential to be a hunt, right? It's either like, if I see that deer, I'm going to go jump in that stand, or I'm, observing, but there's a chance that deer's going to follow this fence line, or he's going to, show up here. So observations, trail cameras, and spotlighting. I'm a big fan of shining deer. I know there's some debate on that. Some people don't like it. I grew up in an area and with a family that shining deer was like that thing you did at bar time a lot of times. And most of my life, as far as that time of year, was like sitting in the back seat of my uncle's truck, them driving around, doing dumb shit. And then I've since learned that information can be extremely valuable. And if you're new to spotlighting or shining deer at 2:00 in the morning, which is illegal anyways, isn't super valuable information. But shining deer a half hour, 45 minutes after dark can tell you a lot, especially on our farm.
What is the rules for shining in Wisconsin? Illinois you can't, but in Wisconsin, is there like a curfew?
Well, it actually does fluctuate, and I actually just learned this recently. It fluctuates by county in Wisconsin. So there are counties in Wisconsin that you can't even legally. Actually, I don't know if it's county or township. There are some smaller municipalities and jurisdictions that don't allow it. So there are areas you can't shine. But for the most part, in season, you can't shine during any rifle seasons, obviously. But during the bow season, you can shine. I think the curfew is 10 p.m.
Okay.
And again, to me, that information is not super valuable. But, having a farm, or, it doesn't have to be your farm. That's the beauty of shining, right? Is, you can drive down the road and knowing where these destination food sources are. If you can find your target buck, or any buck for that matter, on one of these destination food sources, an hour or two after dark, that right there tells me okay, these deer are flowing into that area.
Narrows down.
Correct.
Yeah.
And if he's there at 10 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night, he's, especially this time of year, he's there for a reason. He's not there just for the food. He's there for food and the does, right? And that's what you're going to see a lot of times is the does go out, they feed, they bed down, the bucks show up, or the bucks feed, they bed, they all hang out there. So it's a safe assumption, it's not always true, but it's safe to assume that buck is going to be in the general area come morning, because if he is locked on one of those does are not going to travel super far. Yeah. That's the big thing.
Yeah, they're the pawns of the game. Let's run through some scenarios that I think are probably very likely. Let's say a guy scheduled his vacation, it's his own farm or his lease or permission piece, and he's just not feeling good. Yeah, I've had a couple pictures of bucks throughout October. I'm still waiting on this magical time to transpire. And I have it's 80 acres. I have my 5 spots pretty much nailed down. But man, I just don't feel good. I don't feel confident with a game plan right now. What would you say to that person to at least corral them in a position to make some sort of a decision or some sort of a play? I mean, if they're not there, they're not there, but maybe they are there, to your point, and they're 200 yards away, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would say is you have to try, at the very least try, right? So again, my tactic a lot of times to find these deer, because again, I know time and time again, I know that trail camera is not the final say in whether that deer is on your farm or not. And I don't care how good your setups are. I mean, I'm a habitat guy, right? I get paid to improve farms for people.
Develop mousetraps.
Correct. That's the best way to put it, because, my strategy, my tactics, my level of ambition are completely different from the next guy. Yeah. His might be higher, his might be lower. A lot of my clients in general, it's not their level of ambition, it's the amount of time that they have, right? Everything's a time investment. Any area of your life that you invest more time into, you are prone to be more successful, right? So if they're for example, if I had to run the numbers on it, I would say 30% of my clientele are surgeons, literally surgeons or dentists or, some medical professional at some level. They almost all either own their own practice or, they're very busy people. Most of my clientele in general are business professionals. They're very busy. They don't have a lot of free time. So my job is to come in and create as much opportunity as possible and create those mouse traps. And part of that is creating scenarios where you're getting more consistent census of what's on your property, right? But at the same time, we know, even more so now, right? What I love about a lot of this recent thermal drone stuff that's coming out is a lot of these guys are proving my points, not just my points, but a lot of the things that we talk about. And one of the things I've talked about frequently with clients is mature bucks aren't going to follow the same trail every day. They just aren't. They're very tactful with their movement. If they're not seeking a doe, that's when they seem to be very deliberate. Like, I'm nose to the ground and I'm going.
Yeah.
But if they're just cruising or traveling from point A to point B, they're usually browsing along the way. And they don't follow the same trail. They just don't. So if you're relying on that camera to tell you that buck moved down that trail, to tell you that the buck's in the area, you're just not going to get pictures of them. So getting out there, visual observation from the field is the most valuable, right? And even when you do get pictures of a deer, this is another big thing, and I'm sure we've talked about this before, but another big thing with trail camera pictures is I do not care what the scenario is, but do not assume you know what direction that deer is coming from a trail camera picture. A big tactic that I employ is running cameras in tandem at some point. Now, it might be, an anchor on this food plot and a camera here and a camera there, or it might be deliberately like, here's a line of movement, camera here, camera there. If you don't get pictures of that buck on two different cameras, two different locations in a relatively short period of time, it's really hard to anticipate the movement. A few years ago, well, I guess 10 years ago now, I was hunting this buck early in the season, and he was showing up on the small, like, hidey hole food plot very, very consistently. But I could not figure out where he was coming from. And as you know, I worked for a trail camera company for 10 plus years. So I had a lot of resources. So instead of like moving a camera here, moving it there, I was like, I'm just going to add another camera. At one point in time on this food plot that was about 1/8 of an acre, I had like 7 or 8 cameras around it, either on it or trails leading up to it. And one day I had a theory that he was circling the downwind side of the plot. So I moved in with the climber, hung the set, hunted, didn't see a single deer. I got down, walked out the edge of that plot. The timestamp on that camera was like, I don't remember exactly. It was like 7:10 p.m. The camera that I had set up over the trail in the woods that I was hunting, I got a timestamp of that buck at 7:08 p.m. So literally the same time I was walking out, he came down that trail. And then the next time I went out and hunted, he came from a different spot. Long story short, you can't anticipate that from one single picture. So, and I've got a lot of, I've been this way before. You get this picture, deer's going from right to left. He must be coming from here going to there. And then I go out and hunt, and I watch this buck walk around the backside of the camera and then come in and go this way. It's especially true on food plots, especially true on scrapes. Those bucks more often than not will circle downwind of them and scent check them. They're not, the food plots, they're looking for does, they're looking for threats, whatever it might be. The scrape, I think a lot of times they just walk by them and they're like, if I don't smell anything I don't like, I don't care, right? Do I need to mark over the top of another buck? Do I need to scent check it for does? So whatever it might be, just don't hang your hat on the trail cameras. Now, that being said, another strategy that I will deliberately employ this time of year is I will move my cameras specifically to community scrapes. In fact,
in November.
Actually, I've got most of my cameras there by the last week in October or so. Yeah. I don't rely on cameras a lot this time of year because things are so sporadic, but it is kind of that census check. And now in our area, you can't bait, you can't do mineral, you can't do those things. So I will have cameras on community scrapes most of the summer just taking census. And during the summertime, they're not tearing up the ground, but they're still hitting that licking branch a lot. So early in the season, mostly food sources. Later in the season, mostly community scrapes. If you can find that community scrape that's on the edge of a food source, double whammy.
Yeah.
community scrape on the edge of a bedding area, double whammy. Yeah, and that's usually where they're going to be, right? A thermal hub somewhere in there. But what I've found time and time again, specifically when I'm looking for my mature buck and he seemingly disappears, I anticipate that he's probably locked down with a doe. And I just sit back and I wait. And this is about the only time that I employ cell cams, because I don't have great cell service on the farm. So I'm not real keen on them. And I also would argue that I think you miss a lot with cell cams because you put too much weight on it. I think there's so much more valuable information that can be obtained by scouting your way into an area, pulling that card, scouting your way out, sitting down at that computer, scrolling through in chronological order everything that happened in that location and pairing that in your brain with what you saw there at this point in time. How do we get to this point, right? Yeah. Leading up to it. Cell cameras are like this trickling of information, and my experience working for a camera company for 10 years, most guys out there, and don't be this guy, most guys get that cell cam picture, they screenshot it, text it to their buddy, they don't save it, they don't keep that historical information. A lot of times they zoom in, they don't even have the time and date. It's totally irrelevant information other than that buck was there at that point in time.
And he's alive.
And he's alive.
Yeah.
Which sometimes is all you need, right? But at the same time, I will look at those community scrapes. I get cell cameras on them. So a lot of times I'll have non-cell cams, and I'll bounce the cell cams around if I need them. But I'll make sure I have them on community scrapes on what I think is like the edges of that buck's range. And I've seen it plenty of times. You know, a few years ago I was after a really big 9-pointer, and he disappeared. I moved the cameras. A couple days later, the same night, I had pictures of him on a community scrape on the south end of the valley and north end of the valley, about 3/4 of a mile apart. The next morning, I was like, okay, he's on the move. He's searching for does. That's why they're going to those scrapes, right? That's like the telephone booth for deer. I went out and I hunted basically in between those 2 points in what I thought was the best, most huntable doe bedding area given the wind conditions. And sure enough, he came right in that bedding area the next morning, pushing 2 does in there. I had a phenomenal hunt. I didn't end up getting a shot off. He was at 30 yards behind a deadfall for 20 minutes. The doe got behind me. She took off. He, you know, you guys know how the rut goes, and he was gone. You couldn't get him to stop.
He was going as fast as he was there.
But, you know, again, it was just confirmation that I made the right decision. Essentially, it just didn't execute. So that's a big thing. I think, you know, again, don't get discouraged. You have to get out there and get boots on the ground and scout. Never. I mean, it almost sounds cliche to say it because everyone says it this time of year. And if they're not saying it, they should. Don't stop scouting.
Yeah.
Right. It's like the same thing. Like, don't forget to shoot your bow a few times during the season. Don't forget to, you know, at least one point in time, put all your layers on and try and shoot your bow, because it's those little things that add up. But I think all too often we scout early season. We scout through the season. We love seeing those new scrapes torn up. Oh, it's so exciting. Let's get a camera over here. That's just a huge waste of time. You know, like having cameras in consistent scrape areas, our scrapes, that's fine. But don't chase that sign so much as anticipate where it's going to be. And that's where having those cameras in the right location helps you anticipate where that buck is at any given time. But don't stop scouting, because everything's changing in the whitetail woods all the time. And like you said, this time of year, everything's escalated so fast. It just rapidly changing.
On everything, it feels like.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. So you got to get out there.
Yeah. Get out there, be methodical. Something that you said, it might have been one of the first podcasts we ever did, but you had mentioned, like, let's say for someone that, they're like, yeah, probably hunted some stands I shouldn't have in October, or some unforeseen, you know, everyone plans what their season's going to look like in their head, but you know, maybe a neighbor ended up shooting a deer and they had to go and track on your farm, or, you know, like there was some sort of pressure change that was either self-inflicted or something out of your control. But something that you had said at one point was like, picture an air mattress with a little bit of air, and like where the pressure's at, the air goes the other direction. I feel like that's probably a key thing to think about when it comes to the rut, whether it's like, man, I've really hunted this side of the farm now. Activity seems to have dropped off. Sightings are down, but there's this corner over here where I kind of ignore. I haven't even really been there. I shed hunted it this spring. And with the travel of whitetail cribs and this, hearing like all the different stories, like, yeah, so-and-so went to the spot that no one does. And so like, is that a legitimate strategy this time of year potentially?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. So that analogy that I like to use is, you know, to explain pressure as a relative thing, right? And, you know, I was just out west, and Had a hole in my air mattress, so I was like, I thought about that while I was out there sleeping on the ground. But ultimately, if you have a partially deflated air mattress and you step on one end, boop, that other end balloons out. And it's the same thing when we put pressure on a certain area of the property, or the neighbor puts pressure on their property. It just pushes those deer into the lower pressure areas, right? So it is definitely a thing. Now, take it for what it's worth. One thing I didn't talk about when we're telling all these stories. And, again, you've been on the farm, you've seen the topo maps. I have never killed 2 deer in the same spot on our farm, ever.
Wow.
Ever. Not even close, honestly. And I think a big reason for that, one, in the beginning, when I was figuring things out, be like, oh, again, this spot's really good. Oh, I found this spot in November. I'm going to get to it right away next year. And then I burn it out. Or what happens to me sharing a farm with 17 other people is, and I've since learned to just like share limited details. But essentially, if they know that I killed this buck in that spot, then the next year, or even that same year, I've got 3 or 4 guys that are fighting over hunting that spot because obviously I've got another big buck tied up there. Mm-hmm. But yes, you're spot on. Pressure, I always say pressure limits potential. And again, it's very relative. That can come into play both ways. I look at pressure as a tool. It's not a tool that I'm operating, but it's a tool in our arsenal if you understand how it affects deer. And I've had to adapt that way because I have so much pressure on the farm and the surrounding area.
Yeah, and I think if most people are hunting, a 40, a 30, an 80, obviously they're only hunting their portion, but like more than likely if they're in a deer neighborhood, something similar is happening to some degree. Obviously, you're probably not as in tune with it necessarily, but I feel like the reason this will resonate with everyone is everyone deals with hunting pressure. Yeah,
well, and I would say or argue that the smaller the property, the more you need to manage pressure. One of the biggest advantages that I've had in my hunting, and also the reason why I understand deer at the level that I do, is because of the amount of land I have access to hunt. And, it's not like a 200-acre farm in Iowa where there's a lot of depth of cover or, like you have full control of this 200-acre block or whatever it might be. Our farm is very broken up. I mean, you see the topography. And if you laid out or color coordinated the different properties by ownership, you would see this like quilted pattern across the landscape. So with that being said, these bucks are on, anywhere from 2 to 4 or 5 properties on any given day. And they're moving around all the time. But my advantage is that, one, okay, so let's rewind. I went to college for wildlife biology. So I was immersed in this research world. Then I worked for a trail camera company for 10 years. So I was even more immersed in the research world because I was working directly with wildlife researchers, understanding their demands from the technology side, like how they were monitoring, how they were doing surveys, all these things. I took that and I employed it with basically unlimited amount of trail camera resources to our farm.
To do your whitetail research study.
Correct. And what I learned is, how the deer function and move on our farm. This valley here almost looks like a different herd than this valley over here. So when you start to look at how, the movement of these deer, how they actually function on the landscape and how pressure affects them, a lot of times you're probably looking at the corner or a portion of a deer's range, right? And that valley is part of that. Sometimes that buck will be in 3 valleys on the farm. Sometimes he's only on one corner of the farm. But what I learned with the access to the cameras, the knowledge, bouncing ideas off of legitimate wildlife researchers, is you just start to learn how these deer function and the things that affect them, right? And I would notice that. So, to circle back around these low pressure areas, that's always how it ends up. There's this spot, and sometimes it's that, cliche, stereotypical buck bedded by the public land parking lot. Sometimes it's right under your nose. And we were just talking about this buck that I'm after right now and how I've been hunting a couple 100 yards from the road. Yeah. I'm sitting there watching traffic. I can say, not specifically during the rut, but that doesn't always matter. But I can say the biggest deer that I've killed, I could hear people talking the whole time I was hunting because it was, it was a deep corner of our property, but it's actually like not that far from this guy's backyard, but he doesn't hunt. But on the other side of that, areas with limited pressure, I've got a couple clients that their neighboring properties don't get hunted at all, or it's a wildlife preserve that no one goes in. So they call me and they're all excited, like, oh, there's this spot. It's like basically a huge sanctuary. I'm like, that's probably going to hurt you. It's great to hold deer.
Get deer to the next age class.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when it comes to this time of year and how relative that pressure is, you really have to be careful, because if that deer feels any pressure at all, that spot over there is definitely lower pressure, and that can push deer off your property.
Yeah. What I'm trying to think here is everything's so situational. That's always the challenge with some of this stuff, but I'm trying to think through some things that a lot of people are probably experiencing right now. I mean, one of them is just obviously not seeing the deer that they want. But let's say here's an example of a deer just showed up on camera. It was October 27th, October 26th, maybe it was Halloween. They had a camera on a scrape, and you had mentioned, like, you have to anticipate. So, like, how could someone potentially anticipate? Is it to try to focus on terrain pinch, or terrain funnels, pinches, bedding areas that you historically know? Like, is there a key ingredient that someone can start with and start figuring out on their own? Obviously, they can't listen to this podcast like, well, I listened to this and it went exactly how they said it was going to.
Or maybe it will.
It could for one person.
Yeah,
for
you
one
don't
person,
know
it could.
unless you try.
Yeah.
Well, I would say, as far as like the key ingredient, you should always operate kind of the same way, as far as like, you're trying to collect information, you're trying to make moves, but ultimately you're trying to do these things without tipping the deer off, right? So what does that mean? You still have to prioritize access and exit. I mean, that's a big one.
Yeah.
That's why this time of year, maybe not quite yet, but going in the next couple weeks, I will hunt a lot of all-day sits. And it's not because I'm necessarily anticipating that 10 to 2 movement during the day. It's because I'm trying to get really tight to the edges of these bedding areas, knowing that this deer movement might be shrunk way down, and just knowing that I can get in there in the dark when deer aren't there, but I can't get out of there at 10 o'clock. I can't get out of there at 2 o'clock. I'm going to have to sit there until those deer leave that bedding area before I get out, to avoid risking pressure on that bedding area.
I've done that, man. It's like you feel like you're wasting time, and it's like you okay, so all right, now it's 4:30. Okay, now something could happen. We're hunting the afternoon movement.
Yeah, and then you don't see a thing.
And then you don't see a thing. Like, I just wasted a whole entire day. It's November 6th, it's November 7th, whatever it is, and it carries a lot of weight and question in your own decision making. Like, obviously I felt good enough to be here, but son of a gun.
Well, so there's two ways to look at that. One is that way, and I feel that way all the time. All the time. When I'm in my truck and my hour and 15-minute long drive back to the farm, the entire time I'm battling myself if I don't have intel. If I have the intel, then it's go time. My wife, she's good at the confidence side. Like, she doesn't want me to leave and hunt, but at the same time, she's like, well, he was there last time, so you're right.
Yeah.
So,
finish it off.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, like, if I don't have the intel, then I'm going in kind of blind. I'm just like, oh man, I've been putting off this work and this family thing and all these things, but it's the rut, and you only get so many ruts in a lifetime. But what I was going to say, that's one side of it. The other thing that I think we all too often overlook is part of knowing where a buck is knowing where he is not. So by process of elimination, again, if the cameras aren't turning him up, that doesn't mean a whole lot at all to me. If you know he's alive, that's the biggest thing. Confirmation he's alive, right? So that's for also talking to your neighbors relatively consistently. You don't have to be best friends with them, but you hope that when they kill a deer, they send you a picture or at least tell you, right? So then you're just not waiting. Because that happens too. I've hunted an entire season.
Dead deer.
And then found out that the buck that I was after got killed, like the last week in October or something. So that can definitely happen. But if you're confident he's in the area, if he's on the property, you're getting pictures of him at random, but you can't nail him down, then you really just have to start eliminating variables, right? Okay. And this was a good example. That buck that I stalked in and shot in his bed a couple of years ago, that was the one I was telling you. Like, I hunted, I think, up until the point that I shot that deer, and this was all in November, I hunted like 8 or 9 all-day sits going after that deer. And basically, I started in the edge of this bedding area where I had a good encounter with him the last week in October. And hunted there a couple days. Saw really good movement, didn't see him. Okay, so then I bounced over to a different bedding area. A little bit less movement, didn't see him. Different area, different angle on that area. Some of these areas, bedding areas aren't that big, but you can't see from one side to the other because of the topography, because of the vegetation. So hunt this downwind side, hunt that downwind side. Is he coming? Is he going? Whatever. No. And I'm still getting pictures of him. There's a couple of different bucks on this wall that I've killed in November that I was not getting consistent pictures of, and never any daylight pictures. I get pictures of him an hour after dark. Again, back to the shining, because I mean, like, well, if he's there an hour after dark, where is he bedding? Is he bedding on the neighbors? Is he bedding right here and not moving? And I've seen both happen because of the pressure. They don't move until an hour after dark, or they're up, but they're not out of the bedding area, the secure locations.
They move 50 yards.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's where I kind of, again, put these theories together. Like, well, maybe he is crossing a wide open area using darkness. Two big things, when it comes to cover. I think most guys, a big turning point in their level of success is understanding what cover actually is and what it means to whitetail deer, how they utilize cover for security. Topography is the greatest form of cover because it's always there. It does not change with the seasons. It does not change with vegetation. It's always there. So if you're in hill country or areas of topography, look at those lines of movement, okay? That's one thing. I just wanted to note that. But another factor is darkness. Darkness is a form of cover, right? Deer feel exponentially more secure when it's dark outside. Also, there's less human activity happening at that time. So again, that buck might be showing up on your property an hour after dark. Maybe he's 50 yards away, maybe he's 500 yards away. But what I've seen with a few of these other bucks over the years is they're right across the road, or they're right across the ridge, and they've got their little unpressured pocket that maybe is impossible to hunt, which is why I had to stalk in there and shoot that deer in his bed, because I couldn't hang a stand in there. I tried many times over the years and could never do it. But then basically they wait until right at dark and they shoot across the field, and now they're on ours. So they're not really huntable on our property most of the time, but they might be all of a sudden because now they're locked down with a doe and they end up in that bedding area. So
yeah,
that's the hard part about this time of year, and again, why I have a love-hate relationship with it. But I think ultimately you have to get out there and always hunt from the outside in. So whether you have cell cameras or SD cameras, I'm always working my way deeper and deeper and deeper until I get the intel. Now, if I have that cell camera, or I've got a camera on our farm down in that valley where the cabin is, that's right off the road. It's deep in the property. I would never walk in there, but I can drive my truck right up to it. So if I get back to the farm, or I've got things going on and it gets later at night, 2 hours after dark when most of the deer are out of the valley up in the fields, I'll just drive my truck right to it. And sometimes I get really good intel from a camera like that. And again, you might have a cell camera in a spot like that that's feeding you that information. But if you get that information that says make a move, but work your way up to it if you don't have that information, because the last thing you want to do is just go in there, put all that pressure on the property, and blow everything out.
Yeah. If you had to boil down, 80% of success comes down to 20% of whatever methodology for this time period specifically. What would you say? And I'll add just another layer to this, because I feel like sometimes people inherently kind of want to get lazy in the rut, because well, anything can happen. You can get lucky. But then, there's still people that typically tag their buck in November, and there's a lot of people that don't. And so clearly there's a disconnect, or some people are doing things differently. So in your opinion, with the 80-20 rule in mind, what jumps out to you? Honestly,
it's exactly that. Call it laziness. And I don't want to say that like attacking anyone, but I've been there before. I've got this stand that's been really good. I'm just going to, if I ride it out here, it's going to be really good. And you waste 3 or 4 days there, when really, if you would have hunted over the hill, like I was saying before, you know what? So part of that is, give it a shot. If you can get in and get out and it's safe, it's worth trying. If you're not seeing what you want to see there, don't be afraid to move. Sometimes it's maybe to the bottom of the hill. Sometimes it's over the ridge. Sometimes it's 200 yards upstream or downstream. Don't be afraid to move. So don't be tethered to a specific spot because in your brain that's how your season played out, like you're saying, right? We all go into season kind of visualizing how things should go.
About this time of year I'll probably be here, and this time of year I'll probably be here, and this spot's always been good. I'm going to be there for at least a day or two.
Yeah, and that's where the most recent information always comes into play.
Yeah.
So, again, I always look at historical info and what I know about the property, and with that, all the variables change, right? Food changes, cover changes, neighbors change, all that stuff can change, but you have to have something to go off of and then tie that into most recent information and build off of that and keep moving forward. Just don't get stuck. Again, it's very easy to tell yourself. I mean, animals are lazy in general. Deer are the same way. Like, they're going to take the path of least resistance more often than not. And people are way worse than that because we have way too many conveniences in life, right?
Yeah.
So you are always your own worst enemy. It's always very easy to talk yourself out of climbing that big hill or getting up an hour earlier to push a little deeper and avoid deer in the field. Or, maybe I'll just take today off because the wind isn't quite right, but really it's because it's brutally cold and I've been out there for 3 days and I'm just exhausted. Mm-hmm. You haven't suffered enough.
So get ready to suffer. Just paint me a picture of your favorite. It's going to be a specific date or specific conditions of just like, there's usually, at least for me, like there's a couple times a year like, probably going to shoot a buck today.
Yeah.
Like you always, everyone's like, I think I'm going to kill a buck every time I go. And I don't know if that's not me anyways, but there's times where it's like, okay, I feel really good, or I feel like I'm going to be disappointed if I don't shoot a buck today. Like there's always like, whether the conditions or like the intel to your point or the spot is just like, okay, now is the time, checkmate. Name just whether like wind speed, temperature, barometric pressure, even a specific date or date range in November. I'm curious.
Well, for me, again, and I don't want you to listen to this and say, oh, well, Thomas says that November 4th is the day, right? Again, this is all scientific. I try not to operate. I absolutely operate this way, but I try not to share information that's purely anecdotal, right?
Yeah.
So the science behind this, the historical information, has to do with genetics with the does, right? So we know through evolution that certain does they all carry the same gene, but certain does are going to be bred or go into estrus at a certain time every year. And the reason for that is survival. If a doe is bred too late, early in northern climate, then that fawn is born late, and maybe the survival rate's higher, maybe it's lower. If they're bred too early, the survival rate's lower because there might be a late snowfall. Those things go down. So over thousands of years of evolution, that timing's kind of worked itself out. Now, on our specific farm, again, going back to like researching these deer, what I've seen is one corner of the farm last week of October, hot. Other corner of the farm, second week, or usually for me, it's like November 4th through 7th is really good. And then November 12th, like that time frame is really good. And as far as peak rut goes, I think for me specifically, I get those two waves. Last week in October, first week in November, November 4th through 7th, I usually get a lot of activity, and then November 12th time frame. But like we talked about in the Cribs episode, I think a lot of that for me is that's usually the weekend before the rifle season, and I'm just way more aggressive. But also, usually those bucks have bred 3+ rounds of does, and they're not as much seeking the does as they're kind of back out like reclaiming territory, and they're just they tend to cruise a little bit more. Not as far, but they're just like on their feet just a little bit more. They're also worn down. And, for better or for worse, that can make them easier to hunt. Again, details, right? That buck that I shot in his bed, you could argue one way or another if I would have killed him in that same scenario if it was mid-October. One eye was swollen up a little bit. He could see out of it, but he wasn't feeling the best. How hard do they run overnight? I mean, I watched that deer for 4 hours, and he never stood up from that bed. But that's also how I feel after I've been running hard, too. It's like, I'm just going to sit down. I'm not going to move. So, again, there's all these little things that come into play. But in general, I would look at the historical information. And that's how I coach my clients. When we look at those 4 key elements, that timing element on a bigger scale, historical information is going to help you dial in like when your property is the best, or what areas of your property are the best if you have options, or maybe you're a permission guy, or you own a property, you hunt another, whatever it might be. A lot of guys now, I think, I don't want to say most, but a lot of guys have options, or at least a couple. Maybe this is a really good spot, and that spot maybe might turn something up one way or another. I think that historical information from trail cameras is so important. Yeah. So, we're talking about the here and the now, trying to encourage people, trying to help them make some decisions. But I also think it's equally as important for you to be thinking about next year 100%. Right now. And that's where my brain goes. Like right now, this time of year, even if I'm strongly anticipating an encounter with my target buck, I am sitting in that tree stand and I'm not scrolling Instagram and twiddling my thumbs. I'm sitting there and I'm looking at my setup and I'm going, how can I make this better? How can I improve the habitat? How can I improve the pinch point? What can I add for an attraction? How can I improve my access? All these things, and I'm drawing all these lines and putting all these notes and doing all these things in my Onyx. And actually, this is the time of year I would strongly encourage, and not to throw a plug or a sales pitch in, but this is the time of the year I would strongly encourage someone who's anticipating maybe getting help on their property with some sort of long-term plan. Now is when you pick up the phone and call and go, hey, this is my scenario.
You have more foundation to build off of.
Correct. And also, all these things are really fresh in your mind.
That's the biggest thing, too.
100%.
Like, I'll remember I need to do this, or I
need
to do that.
You won't.
Yeah, completely.
Because
and you'll remember it when you're there again.
Yes. Because if you're like me, and it's like you get home, you dump your gear, and all these things that you put off all of a sudden are on top of you, and you got to dig yourself out of a hole. There's no time to sit down and do these things.
You don't hunt for a living?
I don't. I hunt to prove what I do for a living. That's basically it, right? Yeah, and I guess I hunt for a living because I hunt to feed myself and my family, right?
Fair. Yeah, that's fair.
But no, what I do with all of my clients, and if you were to become a new client of mine around this time of the year, we would jump on a phone call right now. We would look at your current situation, and I would offer you any level of advice I could. But a lot of that advice is not going to be, well, I think you should do this, because one of the things that drives me nuts is just this idea of hiring someone that's going to solve your problems in something like this, because there's so many variables. My job as a coach, right, I consult on habitat, I coach on the whitetail side of things. My job as a coach is to teach you how to learn from your situation. Look at the variables, look at things, are you seeing something like this, are you seeing something like that, and how do you build off of that? But ultimately, the most important thing is what you take away from each individual season to build off of. Every year is a building year, right? Every single year is a building year. And more often than not, you're going to learn more from those really shitty
long
failure
season.
years.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Or, that situation where you hunt really hard that year and then you screw up on that buck. Maybe he comes in and he busts you. Maybe you make a bad shot, whatever it might be. Those are the things that really hurt and help us a lot. So if you were to call in right now, we'd look at your property a little bit at a high level, but ultimately what I would do is I'd say, okay, as soon as season's over, we're going to do a postseason debrief call. And this is something you can do right now, and I would strongly encourage everyone out there to do this, and this has nothing to do with me or any other consultant. Every one of your setups, try to map out as much as you can. I don't know very many hunters at this point in time that don't have Onyx or what other GPS map. Draw some lines, something that's going to help you visualize, and add a couple notes. What I tend to do is I'll add a lot of notes to the stand location marker just to simplify things. Like I can add 40 markers to any given setup, but I want notes kind of consolidated in one spot. And I keep a journal. But if you put it all in Onyx, put those notes in there while these things are really fresh in your mind. And another thing I do when I'm on stand is I take notes in my phone. This stand location, AM or PM, I was on stand at this time, this is the wind direction, this is the temperature. And then as I see deer or see movement, I jot a little note down. 4:50 PM, 4 does, north bedding area to south along this line. I try to shorthand it. It makes sense to me. If you read it, it wouldn't mean shit to you, right? But in general, if you look at that note and I look at that set up on a map, like I can paint that picture. And the reason I do that is because when I go back to make my habitat improvements in the off season, there's never never enough time, right? There's an endless amount of work that you can do, but these are what I refer to as those micro improvements, right? So I'm looking at that, I'm looking at my notes and going, okay, now I remember, if it's not already burned in my brain, I'm like, oh, I had that encounter with that deer, but he wasn't close enough. Or, whatever it might be. I tried to get in this spot, but I couldn't on this wind. And maybe it's just a timing thing. Like you can't hunt that spot on that wind or whatever it might be. But basically, I'm just trying to note and visualize how I can get better. So as soon as season's over, I can start making those improvements. And maybe your notes suck because you don't have a whole lot going on, right? You don't have a lot to actually note because you're not having a lot of encounters. Now, if you're getting a lot of pictures of deer and not having a lot of encounters, then we need to talk about your habits, probably your access and timing as much as anything. But if you're having a lot of encounters and you're just not seeing quality deer, then we need to talk about herd management. There's all these things that come into play. We were just talking earlier about this community cooperative meeting that I'm doing, that I've done a handful of these for other clients. Essentially what they do is they hire me to come in and educate the whole community. As many people as we can get there. And we've had phenomenal turnouts with these things.
Wow.
It actually blows my mind.
Everyone wants the same thing.
Correct.
Yeah, but everyone feels like they're on different teams.
That's exactly it. It is a competitive thing. Mm-hmm. Back to like that relative pressure, right? But at the same time, if we're all aiming for the same goal, that's a lot better, right? Versus like we're all battling each other and fighting against each other. But yeah, this recent community cooperative I did, I was blown away because this gentleman is from the general area, but he bought a property in the middle of a lot of like very established family farms and new guys and tradition. And I was on the property a couple times and got mean mugged from some neighbors and stuff like that. And I was just like, well, we're gonna see how this goes. And he asked me, and I told him straight up, I was like, we start making improvements, guys are gonna see that, people are gonna ask questions, answer them, share as much as you're willing to share. But he came back and he was like, you think you would be willing to do this? Like, yeah, actually, do these from time to time. And you just get as many guys together as you want to talk to and pick the location and we'll set up a time. And we had every landowner within 5 miles of that farm there. There was like 27 or 28 people at that meeting. And I was anticipating like 4. And it's made a dramatic difference in that area. Just the simple thing of like, hey, we're doing these things to improve habitat, right? Habitat's extremely important because it creates opportunity and increases quality, right? So that's a big thing. But at the same time, we're trying to manage the herd this way, and this is how we're doing it. Like we're trying to reduce the number of does on the property. We're trying to, target a higher age class buck. Now, if you've got young kids or elderly people, like go out and have fun. Like I'm not here to tell you what to shoot. But if you want to kill a bigger deer, these are the steps that we are taking to do it. And if we all do that, it's going to increase our odds exponentially. So you have those conversations and those meetings and things get better. And again, that's the same thing. Like right now, you're sitting in a tree stand and you're just like, what can I do? And that's honestly for me, not just because it's what I do for a living, but my time at home is very important, right? Back to the early part of this conversation, wherever you put time in your life is what's going to be successful. If I neglect my family and my kids to hunt, I might be a more successful hunter. My kids are probably going to be assholes and my wife's not going to be super happy, right? So I have to balance that time out. Now, that's why it's very important to me to be tactical and technical with my approach and plan these things out and do everything that I possibly can do to put the odds in my favor. And again, if having a conversation with a neighbor or sharing some trail camera pictures with a neighbor makes him hold off on pulling the trigger on that 3 or 4 year old, well, now we just increase the age structure of the area for next year. And that increases my odds for next year because now instead of having 1 target buck, maybe I have 2, right? Or instead of having that 1 buck that's all over the place, maybe, there's 2 or 3 that are sticking around the area because there's less pressure in that corner of the farm, whatever it might be. So anything you can do, you should do it, but always be thinking like, every year is a building year. What can I anticipate? But at the same time, how far can I go this season to learn as much as possible? And again, you got to be out there. at the end of the day. And that's, you'll see a lot of guys talk about this. I've got some really good friends that are, arguably maybe even better whitetail hunters than me. And they'll basically get in this mode right now. They're like, well, at this point, all I have left to do is grind. Like, I know that deer's in the area. I just have to grind it out. So again, don't ignore access exit strategy, because
remember the fundamentals.
Correct.
Still hunt smart, but hunt hard.
Correct. And that's exactly it. You just got to put the time in.
Yeah.
And again, don't be afraid to move. Like, if you see that breadcrumb, right? Like, following those breadcrumbs, that clue to the next clue to the next clue. If you see that, don't ignore it just because it's not convenient. You know what I mean? It's just I can't tell you how many times I've been in that situation where, if you're watching this, listening to this right now, you might already be there, because I've been there many times early November, and that's my exact thought process is, shit, like, I've got 2 more weeks of this. This could be really bad. But then tomorrow I get that cell cam picture, like, okay, I'm good to go again, right? Now you kind of have that new life. But you just gotta stick with it, and you gotta stay smart about your approach, and just, if you have to take a break, take a break. Back off for a little bit. It's never going to hurt you to take pressure off the property, but at the same time, like, if that buck's only on your property for that 3 to 5 day window, and you back off because you're a little tired or things didn't go the way you wanted them to, you might miss that opportunity for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's all in the details. Hopefully this lays some ideas out, whether you're keeping notes, you're really still paying attention to your access, you're making moves, and I mean, hopefully someone shoots a giant buck after they listen to this.
One thing, sorry to cut you off there, but I just kind of realized I didn't actually fully touch on your original question, right? So we talked about the timing element. Set up this time of the year, I don't think is too crazy, right? Like, I'm technical, right? But ultimately, this time of the year, I am just trying to get downwind of where does are going to be. So is it downwind of a food source? Is it downwind of a bedding area? Perfect scenario is a travel corridor that's relatively close to food and bed, because then I can hit both of those. Like, that buck's cruising through both of those, right? So that's what I would be targeting. And, to back up a little bit on this, again, thinking ahead towards next year, if you're paying attention to these doe groups a little bit more, especially later in October, because they're going to move around just a little bit too, and they might disperse a little in your area, or they might congregate more depending on what the habitat offers them. But pay attention to those does. And again, correlate that with historical trail camera data, because that's going to be the most consistent variable when everything else is just like scattered. It's, seemingly chaos.
Yeah.
Those does are generally very consistent. Even if you're putting pressure on them, they tend to handle pressure a lot more. So they might show up on that food source a little bit later, but they're still likely in the area. And if you have, a decent family group of does, and generally you're talking like 3 to 5 does in a group like that, they're going to pull a buck in for sure. For sure. So, and that's what I would say, especially if you have that smaller property, right? Again, my advantage is, this corner of the farm's not doing anything. I'm going to go scout this other corner of the farm. Now, your situation might be, my 25 acres or 40 acres doesn't have a whole lot going on. Maybe you should go find some public land or knock on some doors in the general area if you have relationships and if you think that's possible. It's not always possible. That also takes more time. Yeah. But ultimately, those does are very consistent on most properties. If you don't have a consistent core group of does on your property, then you're probably missing some key habitat components with food and cover, and that's a whole other topic of conversation. But that's where I'm going to focus my time. When all things go out the window and I don't have consistent target buck or maybe no target buck at all, I'm going to go, okay, first couple weeks in November here, especially this first week in November, where are those doe groups? How can I get downwind of their movement? And again, the fundamentals, like you said, like, how can I hunt that general area without stirring it up? Like, that should be true every single time you step foot in the woods, whether you're going out to check a camera in July or you're hunting the first week in November. How do I get in there and out of there without deer knowing I'm there? Because every time you stir up an area, it degrades slightly. It takes a little while for it to rebound, right? So I think I think that's really important, especially this time of year.
I love it. Well, how can people follow along with what you have going on? I encourage everyone to reach out to you. You've been a really good friend, and really respect what you do, and that's why we're sitting here. We just finished up a whitetail crib, so I want people to give you a call if they're interested.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. theuntamedambition.com. That's my website. That's the name of the business. Whitetail Ambition is the whitetail-specific coaching program, but you can look me up on Instagram, The Untamed Ambition, Facebook, mostly active on Instagram, and it kind of spills over. But otherwise, if you have specific questions, if you want to just jump on a quick call and spitball some ideas, if you want to talk about the potential of improving your property, putting together a long-term plan that involves both habitat and hunting strategy, then the best place to go would be the website. You can always fire me an email, Thomas, or you can fire an email in to my assistant who helps manage all these things and keep me on the schedule, especially this time of the year. I will say right now, email info@theuntamedambition.com, because it's a flip of a coin whether I'm going to respond for the next 10 days, because I might be in a tree stand too. And it just depends. If I have cell service, I will get back to you while I'm in the tree stand, but a lot of times I don't have cell service, and this time of the year, my brain is generally in one of two areas. So yeah, that's the best way to reach out. But I strongly encourage everyone, again, think ahead towards the future. It's really easy to feel sorry for yourself with a bad season. But like you said, if you're not doing something to get a little bit better, or at least taking notes, sometimes it's just a really minor thing. It actually blows my mind how many clients I've helped that, we can come in and put together a really elaborate long-term management plan for a property, and that is going to make things better. But when I go through that postseason debrief and they're showing me all these pictures from the last 3-4 years of stud mature bucks, and I'm looking at their locations and everything on the topo map, it's like, man, these actually look like really good spots. And I would say most of the time, most people have stands in pretty good locations. It usually comes down to how they're accessing them and the conditions under which they're hunting them. Again, what's the wind? What's the timing of the year? Those are the biggest things. And a lot of times, just a quick phone call, we're like, well, I'd maybe try this. That's not going to save your whole season, but it might. It very well could. It seems like every time you do a podcast, or like me specifically, when I listen to a podcast, I'll listen to it, and within the first 20 minutes, I'm either like, well, this guy doesn't know shit. He's parodying other podcasts, or maybe he does. He just doesn't know how to explain it. I know a lot of really good hunters that aren't good at explaining why they make the decisions, but usually there's always that one thing that they say that I'm like, yeah, I've never looked at it that way.
Yeah.
And whether it's maybe just how to explain something to someone, or it's just this subtle shift in perspective, it's usually those little things. So I just say that because a lot of times, I actually probably lose some clients because my free 15-minute phone call oftentimes turns into 45 minutes of us chatting hunting strategy, and then I'm like, well, I would just try this, and then they text me like a week later of a deer that they killed, and then I never hear from them again. But it's okay. It's perfectly okay. I mean, I love this stuff. I love talking about it, and this time of the year, we're all in it together, right? We're in the trenches, and it's last year I killed my buck early in the season. I was a little disappointed, because I didn't get to hunt the rut. My son's getting older now, so he's hunting a little bit more, but you can't push a kid the way we push ourselves a lot of times during the rut. So you do miss a lot of those, those mornings that you live for rut hunting. But again, you flip a coin. One day there's nothing, the next day it's just wild. So get out there and suffer. And once you suffer enough, you will have success. And that might take years.
It could.
Some people, it does take years. And again, the suffering, it all pays off in the end.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Thomas. I encourage everyone to watch the Whitetail Cribs episode that's going to go live here very soon. And get out and get hunting.
Yeah. Good luck to you guys.